change to adapt to do that new technology. We mentioned our catering facility in Brisbane. The catering facility is a $75 million facility, state-of-the-art in terms of its food preparation and food disposal. It needs a lot less people. It's a lot more efficient. We need to adapt and change to that. So this is all about us having the flexibility to do it. And what we're saying about this Act is that this takes us backwards. This imposes conditions on us that none of our competitors actually have. It doesn't allow us to be flexible and adaptable to cope with those environments. And the consequences that is that there will be less jobs in Australia because we will not be able to employ the 35,000 people that we have because we will not be able to invest in the new technology, in the new aircraft, and our fleet replacement program will remain a hurdle. That's the reality, and that's what we're saying, Senator. And we're asking for the ability to change and be flexible. That's all we're asking for.
And talking about the competitive differentials, I mean, we shouldn't stick our head in the sand. We should be able to freely talk about the differences between ourselves and our international competitors. We're not asking for a handout on any of those items. We're just merely saying these are the operating parameters that we operate in and the differences that we have to compete with versus our international competitors. So not only do we have to get all of our labour practices efficient in their own right, we've got these added additional competitive pressures that exist.
And you come to the Senate committee with the opening statement that if you don't get your own way, you'll remove yourself from Cairns or Darwin. Well, you know, Cairns and Darwin Airport will survive after Jetstar go. I mean, that's the reality of it. You went there and took somebody else's business. If you go, someone else will come in and take that business up. Tourism won't stop because Jetstar doesn't fly. So I find it offensive that you do probably take the Ryanair business model of threatening to withdraw from services you know, in the first opening line of your gamut. I mean, basically there's a process going on here which will take its course in Parliament. It's not likely to, you know, given the divergent views around here, to be all that threatening to Qantas. But you come in here and the first opening stand that you take is we ain't going our own way, we're out of Cairns, we're out of Darwin.
Well, I'm sorry, Senator, that you've interpreted it that way, because
well,
that was
what you said.
No, what I'm saying is I made it very clear what the consequences of the changes to the Act were. I thought that was the reason that we were asked to the committee to be actually completely open, transparent, and very clear on the implications of this. I don't think I would have done anybody any favours, anybody in Cairns any favours, anybody in Darwin any favours, if that we were silent on the implications of this, let this debate go down that course, which it will, and let a change to the Act occur, and then come out and say what we're doing as a consequence of it. We wanted to be clear and wanted to know what the implications. And, you know, if somebody else can economically do those routes, Senator, I couldn't agree more with you. Let them fill up their boots with them. But the fact is that we've had an open policy, as we said in the opening statements, for international carriers to fly in without any restrictions to these regional destinations, and they haven't. They can't make money out of it.
There are only a certain number of airports, and you've locked up most of the leasing space on those airports, so they can have a 10 shed at the end of the runway on the, you know, Darwin Airport, or they can be 5 miles down from the car park in Melbourne.
But Senator, as you know, Cairns Airport has lost a lot of capacity, and if they have the ability, they absolutely have the ability to have as many international carriers operating in there as they can. Darwin we filled up Darwin because we put the aircraft in that were never there before. We have 4 aircraft based there, employ 160 people. Nobody based aircraft there before. Nobody employed those level of people before. So this didn't exist before Qantas. It won't exist after Qantas, and we're fooling ourselves to think somebody will come in and fill up the gap on it, because it won't happen, because we know the economics of these routes. So Darwin and Cairns will lose as a consequence of this. That's not a threat, that's just a fact. We're not threatening anybody, but it's up to us to outline exactly what the facts are, so nobody has a misinterpretation of what will take place if this legislation is passed. That's why we're here, and so I'm not going to mollycoddle you or coat it. These are the realities of life.
Can I have information?
No, I know what you're going to say, Senator Heffernan, but I'm just thinking...
P or a P?
Do you have many more questions, Senator Gallagher? I'm not being rushed. Because if you have, we'll come straight back to you, but what we might suggest, we'll offer you, gentlemen and ladies, if you want to take a 5-minute comfort break. Okay, I could just see your eyes starting to cross there, Mr. Joyce.
I'm picking the wrong one, Senator, just reconfirm we have a 12 o'clock cut-off to leave, so if we could keep to that.
We'll keep to that.
Thanks, Senator.
So take a 5-minute break and start.
come back?
Okie dokie. Now, Senator Gallagher, did you have any further questions?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's very clear that you're in your submission in regards to the amendments to the Qantas Sales Act. What is your view on the Qantas Sales Act per se? Is it still relevant current, or would you have it removed?
Senator, we support the government's view on this, that the Qantas Sale Act does have a purpose. We support the Minister's position, which is a modification of the Qantas Sale Act in his white paper, which I believe would review the 35% and 25% ownership requirements, but keep the 51% ownership requirements, which we think is appropriate. We obviously, as an Australian carrier, also have the Air Traffic Act, Air Navigations Act requirements, which means for traffic rights we have that 51%. And for Qantas today, we have well over 60% of our ownership owned by here in Australia. So those requirements under the Act we agree with. And of course the other requirements that require us to be with the chairman, the majority of the board being Australian, we totally support.
I think it's worth saying that we spend all of our time, despite of our competitive challenges in our business, trying to create a very strong and viable Australian aviation industry. A lot of what we've done in Jetstar and on the Qantas side is build a strong franchise services, IP that we can export, and a strong and viable business that creates real knowledge jobs in Australia. But fundamentally, it's all about building a strong aviation sector that started from Australia.
Okay, the morale amongst your 30,000 employees, given the events of the last 6 months, I don't know, this is probably not directly related to the Qantas Sales Act or the proposed amendments, but in light of the absolute catastrophic damage to the Australian economy in one 24-hour period, where are you taking your people? Have you got your people on side with this model that you're proposing of investing in Jetstar Japan and Jetstar Vietnam and all of the other Asian adventures, which I think would be quite exciting? Why can't you take your people with you?
Well, we are working on that, Senator, and I have to say, I think for a lot of the groups of employees, bringing that action to an end last year had a big release for them, because I wouldn't underestimate the pressure that our frontline staff were having, our ground staff, our in-flight cabin crew, the pressure that they were under with the continuous disruptions that was taking place. We were cancelling hundreds of flights and delaying hundreds of flights. We had customers extremely unhappy. We had passengers moving to Virgin and the competition. And that was heartbreaking for us, for a lot of our frontline employees. And bringing this to a close, the amount of frontline employees that said to me, at least we did something about it. We stood up and brought it to an end, because they couldn't survive the slow bake. The morale of the company would have gone through the floor if we'd had disruptions for another year, with the frontline staff taking the brunt of the aggression that was out there and the disappointment that was coming from our customers. Of course, every organisation wants to work on the engagement, and we have a big engagement focus in this organisation. We'd like to bring all of the employees with us in what we're doing, and you're absolutely right. It is very exciting what's taking place in Asia, but we have to be honest with the employees about the problems that we're facing and the need for change. And some employment groups have made a transition and are fully behind us. We are making significant changes in the airport environment. The airport staff have introduced a major change with the check-in system, the new automated check-in system that we have. Our cabin crew have worked with us on significant changes to our operations internationally. But there are some areas where we've had resistance, and those areas we have to make a stand, because it's important for all of the employees that we make the transformation that's needed. And if that has hit the engagement in those areas, I'm very disappointed at that. We have to work at turning it around, and we will work at turning that around.
Look, the opposing view to that is you simply took a preemptive strike closed down negotiations, and now you're going to continue to attack your workforce in terms of wages and conditions till you get, your Ryanair model. So don't expect you to respond to that. Just my final question is...
Sorry, Senator, I have to say that is completely not the case, because there isn't a Ryanair model that we're modelling ourselves on. Qantas is a premium...
It's clearly a Ryanair business model. It's pretty available.
It's not clearly the Ryanair business model. We have a very different business model in different parts of our business, and we run a far more complex business than Ryanair. We have a premium business, we have a regional business, a domestic business, and a low-cost business. And even the Jetstar business is not modelled on Ryanair. The Jetstar business, which is the closest to it, has a model that's modelled on the best of low-cost carriers around the world. Some aspects of Ryanair in terms of their operational efficiencies, some aspects of EasyJet in terms of the branding, some aspects of AirAsia in terms of their purchasing and the negotiations. We take the best of every airline around the world and we create a new standard. And people are looking at Jetstar and Qantas as the standards around the world. So we don't have a model that we're copying. We have other airlines copying Qantas, and that's something we should be proud of. Singapore Airlines have just created Scoot, an exact copy of our strategy. Other airlines around the world are trying to copy exactly what Qantas has been doing. So we're the trendsetter, the market leader, and it's our model that's being copied in the rest of the world, not the other way around.
Just one final question. I think, Mr. Buchanan, you said that the practice of using international flight attendants on domestic legs is now discontinued?
No, I didn't say that. What I said was the practice of concentrated tag flying has been discontinued. So when people would, for instance, let me give you an example, someone in Darwin, a cabin crew member, the rostering system may have put them back and forth from Darwin to Melbourne before and did multiple legs on international tag flights. That's what we've discontinued, not the practice of tag flying. So the hub still operates, but we're making sure that they don't do concentrated domestic tag flying.
So just to try and get a particular question, which I think I asked an earlier hearing.
Sure.
So if someone comes in, Darwin goes through customs, and that aircraft then operates as a domestic leg, you're saying that no international flight attendants operate on those domestic legs?
What
or are you saying they do operate?
What we're saying is the Darwin hub operates with international crew on all of the international tag flights through there. If there's a purely domestic flight number flight to and from Darwin, which we do operate back to the clock that don't connect onto any of those international flights, then they'll be served with Australian domestic crew. For the flights that are international tag flights, they'll be served with an international crew, which is a mixture of Australian-based international crew and international-based international crew.
I'm just trying to work out is when they're flying in a domestic sector in Australia, will they be paid Australian wages and conditions?
When they're flying on international flight numbers that are going in and out, so the tag flights that go from Darwin into any of the Australian ports, they'll be paid wherever the domicile of the employment is.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Senator Gallagher. Senator Abetz.
I'll have a quick one.
Yeah.
Quick one before I go. Look, there was a scant reference earlier to the carbon tax, and in light of your announcement last week of an increased fares by virtue of the imposition of the carbon tax on the 1st of July, do you expect your business to recoup with that increase, that announced increase, the full cost of the carbon tax on by fare payers, or will you be diverting other revenue from your business to subsidise the cost of the carbon tax on your business, which could be going towards better employment conditions for Australians?
Well, Senator, we cannot digest the cost of the carbon on our domestic operations, and we've made that very clear when this was announced last year. We signalled our intention to pass that cost on to the consumers, and in the announcement last week, we have announced a range of fare increases, ranging from $1.80 per sector on a Sydney-Canberra leg, as an example, short sector legs, and we've rated it in 4 zones, all the way up to $6.80 for a Sydney-Perth sector, a long sector of the domestic market, per sector, per passenger booked. So that's what we will be increasing the airfares from on the 15th of February. Of course, we're a unique company, and that this applies from the 1st of July, but we have people booking now for the 1st of July travel, so it means we have to increase the airfares now for that period for travel from the 1st of July. It will impose around $115 million cost on the airline, and our intention is to raise that through this increase in airfares. Our belief is it will be fully recovered. The domestic market, we have seen fare increases that have taken place as a consequence of increased fuel, and in the domestic market we are recovering that full fuel increase, so we believe we can recover the carbon tax as well. If it was on international, we wouldn't. We'd be very worried about it. We also announced the $3.50 increase because we're also subject to the European trading scheme, which comes in also this year, and that's a $3.50 per sector increase on applicable sectors into Europe that we've also increased the airfares on. And we're also the only airline in the world that's subject to 3 regimes, because we're also subject to the New Zealand regime, which is going to have a carbon tax on it. Now, our view has been the same as the IATA view, that our preference would have been a worldwide system, so that it was a sectorial approach per sector, and that all of the airlines in IATA would have preferred a system that would apply to all airlines, so you don't have distortions associated with it, and the complexity of managing a huge amount of different types of schemes with the different requirements on them. That would have been our preference. We're also undertaking a huge amount of activity to reduce our carbon footprint, because along with our CO2 reductions, we can reduce fuel costs. And as I mentioned, our fuel bill in the first half of the year is $2.2 billion. It's gone up by $450 million. We have every incentive to reduce our fuel costs anyway, and we will be doing a range of activities to reduce that cost. And there are a number of things that we intend to do. First is the continued rollout of efficient aircraft, as I think the chair asked about the fuel efficiencies of the new technology. That new aircraft, like the A380 and the 787s, will dramatically reduce our CO2 footprint and reduce our fuel costs. We are starting the first Australian airline to operate a sustainable aviation fuel flight, and we're doing this in March. We believe that there's a huge opportunity to create sustainable aviation fuels here in Australia. We spend about $4 billion a year on fuel. It's all going to the Middle East. There's an opportunity for us to invest here in Australia, and we are working with the government, working with state governments for funding to try and start testing a number of different alternatives for sustainable aviation fuel, which could create thousands of Australian jobs, and we believe can do an efficient rate. We've signed up for 2 alternatives, Solacine and Selena. They are using, one of them is using algae from sugarcane and using the waste from sugarcane. One of them is using rubbish from the cities. We're also trying some other alternatives, because we believe no one source will produce the fuel that we need. And I think it's a great news story.
Sounds like a direct action plan to me.
It's a great story for Australia if we can get this up and running and going. And then, of course, we've been spending a lot of time on reducing our weight on the aircraft and using sophisticated new tools like satellite navigation to improve the flight paths into airports. And I think there's going to be one big debate going forward about the trade-off between CO2 pollution and noise pollution, because there's certainly a way of us reducing CO2 pollution by using standard flight paths into various airports, but of course increases the noise pollution over an individual constituency. And I think that's a worthwhile debate for us having gone forward, because there's a real opportunity for us to reduce fuel costs and CO2 costs with the use of the satellite navigation systems that we're applying at the moment. So it's something that we don't take. It's something that we don't take lightly. It's something that we need to invest in. But we have the biggest incentive you could imagine. If your fuel bill increases by $450 million in half a year, you don't need any other incentive to reduce your fuel costs.
Right.
Okay. So 150 million annual cost.
115.
115
annual cost.
Fully recouped by the Australian consumer.
It's passed on to the Australian consumer. We cannot digest
the
it.
Australian public pays, and that's at variance with whatever other company.
Sorry?
With other airlines around the world will be forced to pay.
So it only applies to domestic, so it only applies to domestic travel, so it doesn't apply to international.
CO2 international.
You made that very clear, Mr. Joyce. I'm going to pull it up because we are mindful of the time. The Senator Betts has been waiting.
You don't want to talk about carbon tax?
All right. I'm happy to, Senator Evans, but if you want to waste your colleagues' valuable time on
happy to ask questions to my leader.
You didn't like the answer, tough, all right? There's nothing in it for you for the
That was a very good answer, very helpful.
Move on.
Shows the cost of living will increase and that a direct action plan would work. So it's a very good answer. But Chair, unlike some of my colleagues, I'm happy being a senator. I'm not auditioning to try to be a CFO of a airline. But if I might just ask a few questions. And first of all, Mr. Paul Sheehan had an article in today's Sydney Morning Herald. I don't know if it's been drawn to your attention, but it tells us that a business class airfare on the website, Sydney to London, was $7,547, whereas with Emirates it was $3,757, which is a pretty stark difference. And without going into all the reasons why that is that an indication of the sort of competition that Qantas is facing on its international routes?
Absolutely, Senator. I think it's a good example. We know that the Qantas brand does demand a premium, but that premium has limits, and that the premium that we have both domestically and internationally is something that we think is very valuable. It's something that we nurture. It's something that's the reason why we're investing in new product and new technology. But the fact is that we mentioned before, Emirates have their labour costs are 15% of their total costs, as an example. Ours are 25%. That 10% difference on a $16 billion business is $1.6 billion. That is a huge difference. We also have a difference, as Bruce pointed out, in depreciation, because they have accelerated depreciation over their assets, and they also have other advantages given where they are and where they're located. They don't pay any taxes, corporation tax, payroll taxes, so all of those make a huge difference and mean that Qantas has to compete with those type of airfares. I should say that I think there's another carrier on the economy side that just came out with a $650 airfare to the UK. So we're competing with extremely low airfares, and because of the economic situation in the European market, with the economy suffering and the impact that that's having on travel, we are seeing very aggressive airfares out there in the marketplace, with people filling up their capacity, because airlines have a lot of fixed overheads, a lot of fixed costs that are in place, and incentivise carriers to go out there with very attractive airfares to fill up them and get some revenue for them, and that's what we're experiencing at the moment.
I think at the last hearing, Mr. Joyce, you indicated to us that the commentary by one of the unions about doing a slow bake on Qantas was having a huge impact in relation to forward bookings. I understand that the author of the slow bake comment and his union have now come to an arrangement with Qantas. Has that been fully finalised as yet?
It has, Senator. So through the Fair Work Australia process, when we went into arbitration, both parties then had constructive dialogue in that process and reached an agreement before Christmas, which has just been ratified by Fair Work Australia.
So when are you building the new hangar?
We're not building. This is a deal we could have done 9 months ago. This is a deal we could have done a long time ago, and all of those conditions and requests were dropped when we signed the deal.
Right, so we've had a lot of this agitation within the marketplace and quite inflammatory commentary by certain people against Qantas for a period of 9 months. And what you're saying is that largely through the Fair Work process, Qantas has ended up with what was on the table to the union 9 months ago.
Yes, the important part, as you know, Senator, we were always concerned about was the so-called additional job security conditions that the unions were asking for, which were restrictions around building hangars for aircraft that are not going to need heavy maintenance for a long time and may never be economic to do them here in Australia. Conditions around how we would maintain our fleet and locking in outdated work practices that are changing, because the regulator is is changing those practices. We call it maintenance on demand, and there's the use of what we call A licenses in particular. The company now can get on and manage the business the way it needs to manage the business to bring in those changes and get the benefits of the new technology. And all of those restrictions that were being asked for have been dropped and are not in the new agreement.
And how long does this agreement last for?
It's a 3-year agreement, so it will, 31st of December 2015, I believe, is when it will expire.
Right, there's, many Australians were clearly inconvenienced, not only by the threat of stoppages and actual stoppages, but then also by Qantas's lockout and subsequent grounding of the fleet, or grounding of the fleet, I suppose technically before the lockout took place. But all of that, you're saying, took place over a 9-month period when at the end of it all, that which Qantas had on the table was the deal struck with your negotiations in Fair Work Australia.
Yeah, that deal would have been doable, as I said, Senator, 9 months previously, because our biggest concern, we always said we would have a fair and equitable pay arrangement, and this did include a 3% pay increase for the engineers for every year over the period, plus backdated money associated with it. That was always going to be what we were going to pay. So this was never a dispute over, as we said at the time, the pay. This was a dispute over job security claims, which we would have said anti-job security claims. They would have restricted this company to an environment where it couldn't be flexible and adapt, and it would have endangered jobs, and that's why we had to stand. I cannot mention, Senator, you just mentioned the implications for our customers. Again, I would emphasise, there were 70,000 customers before the grounding. There were over 90,000 customers affected by the grounding. We've been working diligently at building back and apologising to those customers, both before and after. But the biggest thing that was causing us the problem, that we were hearing continuously, that was causing the Qantas brand problems, was the unreliability of Qantas. We were in a position where, I think I mentioned to you in the last Senate committee, we had a 40% drop in premium traffic on our East Coast services, 20% drop in Canberra, 14% drop on the Perth East Coast market. It was costing us like 15, 20 million a week, and it was getting worse. What happened after the grounding? Well, it's great to see the business market unbelievably support Qantas. We started seeing immediate, rapid return of that business community. The business community was saying we were thankful to Qantas to bring back certainty. And if you actually look at our on-time performance, in the 3 months before the grounding, Virgin beat us on on-time performance in those 3 months, the only 3 months of the year. But since the grounding in November, December and January, Qantas is back in the lead, the most reliable carrier, the best on-time performance and the lowest levels of cancellations. And we've seen the business market respond dramatically to that and come back to Qantas. And for our flexible airfares, we're seeing double-digit growth on last year at the moment. And our market research shows that for our Platinum and Gold frequent flyers, they are unbelievably supportive of what we did, because it brought certainty back to Qantas's operations, and that engagement has been fantastic. And I personally have received a huge amount of calls from corporate CEOs around Australia saying it was absolutely the right thing to do, and showing the support of what Qantas did, and the fact that brought certainty back for the business community, which is great.
And so in short, your forward bookings have increased substantially to where you were when you were before the committee last time.
Absolutely, Senator. And, some of the corporate accounts that have come up for renewal, that would have been difficult if we were in a period of slow bake, as one of the union leaders put it, where I would have said as a high risk we wouldn't have renewed them. We've renewed those contracts at the end of last year, and we even obtained some contracts we didn't think we were going to get because of that support from the business community, because they believed that this brought certainty to Qantas's operations, and it was absolutely the right thing. So not only are we back to where we were before it, I think our brand for those core frequent flyers is a lot stronger than it was before this.
Last time round you were being vilified as a rogue employer for having used the provisions of the Fair Work Act, and it's interesting to note that the person that made that highly inflammatory commentary, Senator Bob Brown, is nowhere to be seen. When the real hard work is done without TV cameras, Senator Brown is never to be seen. But that aside, are you aware of any other employers that have taken similar action to yourself in relation to lockouts, which would indicate that if you are a rogue employer, then there must be a lot of other rogue employers out there in the marketplace?
I think there are, Senator. I don't know the list.
In the trucking industry, right?
Yeah, there's been a few, I think.
Yes.
But again, I think it's a great...
Roads or a few lockouts?
There's
Lockouts, I think.
But I do think you're right about the language and how disappointing it was that when a company, for its own survival, for when it had no alternatives but to do this dramatic action of a lockout, because we don't take it lightly, to have to do a lockout and ground the airline and the implications that had for our employees, for our customers. It was something, as I said, we don't take lightly. But we did it as a consequence of the union action, and we did it as a consequence of the union saying this was going to last another year and that they were going to have 48-hour stoppages. The unions would have done it anyway or were doing it to us. We cancelled over 800 flights, I think, because of the union action. We delayed another 350 more flights. 70,000 people impacted onto it. There was no condemnation of the unions saying that they were rogue unions. And their action was more detrimental to where we stand. And I don't think it helps the debate in this country when you've got a very tough industrial relations environment and where companies have no alternative but to take the action they have to in order to ensure the survival of their companies. And as I said at the time, the easiest thing for me to do would have been to give in to the unions. But I know, and that wouldn't have been a problem probably on my watch as CEO of Qantas, but we had to stand up because we have to ensure that Qantas is around for the next 90 years, and conceding to those outrageous union demands would have resulted in this company not being viable into the future, and I had no alternative but to do what I had to do.
Right, can I, as I understand, last time there were 3 unions with whom you were in dispute with. The engineers is now settled. I understand the pilots are off to the High Court, is it? Federal Court?
Yeah, the pilots have...
and they're appealing that, so we'll have to await the decision of the courts on that one. So can we move to the Transport Workers Union?
Before we do, sorry, Senator Best, can I declare an interest? I'm a member of the Transport Workers Union.
Yeah.
We would never have guessed from the last hearings, but there you go. We would never have guessed.
If you've forgotten, I'll remind you as many times as you like. I'm proudly a member of the Transport Workers Union. There you go.
Right. Does the Transport Workers Union cover the cabin crew?
No, it doesn't.
Right, all right, thank you for that. I do want to move on to the cabin crew issue, and that is about the commingled crews. Example, Australians and Thais on the same flight, doing the same thing but allegedly on different wages. One, is that correct? And is that a standard practice across the industry internationally?
It's probably worth clarifying that we do, as I understand it, the TWU are not party to the Jetstar cabin crew agreements in Australia, but as I understand they do have some members in the Jetstar cabin crew workforce. And yes, we do have, like all international airlines, we use a variety of labour and basing of staff to mount our international services. So we will have some crew out of Singapore, some out of Thailand, some out of New Zealand, some out of Australia to mount our operations. But still, despite Jetstar growing to 3,000 flights a week and 2/3 of those flights operating outside of Australia, we still employ 2/3 of our cabin crew still inside Australia. And even for the cabin crew on the business that we're talking about in the Australian market, still 2/3 of the cabin crew are employed in Australia. So the lion's share of all of our staff are still employed in Australia, and all of the knowledge workers and where the IP is created are in Melbourne under Australian contracts.
And in relation to those that come from overseas, that other 1/3, are they, one would assume, paid less than Australian?
That is correct. They're paid, and I think we talked about the statistics before, on average a Thai cabin crew member gets around $2,000 a month, and an Australian cabin crew member will be somewhere between $5,000 and $6,000 or $7,000 a month.
How do you strike the rate of pay for those overseas cabin crew, and is it also related to the cost of living in those countries?
Absolutely. We set up rates of pay that are generous in each of the markets because we want to be an employer of choice. So for instance, in Thailand, our cabin crew are paid around 10 times the average salary, 17 times the minimum wage, and therefore we have a very, very low attrition rate in Thailand. And we have one of the, we put an ad out for cabin crew to give you a feel. We're looking for 100 cabin crew jobs in Japan at the moment. We've just had 10,000 applications. We're looking for 28 cadets that we're employing in Australia recently, and we got thousands and thousands of applications. These are well sought after jobs. We have very low attrition rates, and we attract some of the best talent into the business. And because of the cost of living in Thailand is substantially lower, and you can imagine their peers with a salary that's 10 times the average, these people are fairly well off in their market and are well looked after in terms of when they work for Jetstar.
I understand Senator Williams has a quick supplement.
Just on that, those people, crew from Thailand, you pay them in Australian dollars?
No, we pay in Thai baht, so I've given you the conversion to Australian
So
dollars.
you're looking at about 60,000 Thai baht a month, 2,000 Australian dollars, around 30 Thai baht Australian dollars.
It's around that, yes. The exchange rate obviously moves all the time. But, yeah.
Exactly.
Are you a currency dealer?
Well, he's been everything else.
Well, that is a huge salary in Thailand, 60,000 Thai baht a month.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Chair.
Right, can I ask then, do they, whilst their wages differ, what about things such as hours of duty, fatigue regulations and other conditions? How does that compare?
No, that's something we talked about. I think Senator Xenophon asked a lot at the last hearing in November. And, the training standards are identical, the rostering practices are identical. We don't treat cabin crew that work on any of our services any differently based on where they're employed. In fact, talking about our training and fatigue risk management, which got a lot of discussion last time, we've had 12 external audits on our fatigue risk management over the last 12 months. We've done 150 internal audits on our safety management systems and practices. We've done 1,000 investigations. We've had 12,000 reports from staff. This is something that we take seriously and we're working constantly at.
Now, if the proposed legislation were to be implemented, there's been the suggestion that Qantas's viability would be seriously at stake. Can you indicate to us how many other airlines are actually genuine, private and profitable airlines and not under some sort of arrangement like in the United States or state-sponsored and subsidised, but like so many other airlines around the world?
Are profitable or?
Yes.
There's, I think,
private and profitable.
Private and
when I say private, I mean genuinely private.
I think British Airways is now profitable again. Lufthansa will be profitable. Air France is losing a lot of money. Most of the European carriers are losing money. The North American carriers have turned the corner because they've gone into bankruptcy, Chapter 11, and essentially, as you know, bankruptcy allows them to renegotiate all of their workplace agreements and their lease agreements. And Delta and United have turned the corner and are profitable again. American were losing money, but that was the only reason they had to declare bankruptcy. Air New Zealand overall, I think, is government owned, yes, so that doesn't apply. So there's very few in that category.
And that is what puts, if I might suggest, immense pressure on Qantas, because you cannot rely on the government handouts to keep you going, or Chapter 11 arrangements as it seems to be continuously arrived at in the United States for the airline sector.
I think it's absolutely right, Senator. There's a lot of distortion in our industries with state government's involvement, and as you said, Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which helps, and that makes our challenge even greater. But you do see on certain routes, like as I mentioned, the United States routes, even with that, we've seen Qantas turn the corner there, and Qantas go back into the services to LA as profitable. So we can manage and fight against, even with that extreme disadvantage. And we find it very difficult to do it against the Middle Eastern carriers and what's happening in Europe, and that's why we need to make the structural changes.
I mean, one of the interesting examples, which is a similar sort of cost structure to Australia and as a partner of ours, so it's an interesting one that you can see around what can be done through restructuring business, is Japan Airlines. Now, they're obviously not operating from what would be regarded as a lower-cost Asian labour market. They're operating from Japan with all of its cost structures and currency issues as well. And having gone through a special bankruptcy process that was set up by the Japanese government just specifically for JAL, they've been able to turn around the corner from losing $1 or $2 billion to making $1 billion straight out of bankruptcy. And that's an incredible turnaround when you think about the state of the global economy at the moment and going through that same process at the same time. And that's not changing their location or getting rid of all their Japanese heritage. That's about restructuring, driving productivity, restructuring their business, and the sort of thing that's open to someone going through bankruptcy.
Now, just one final question, if I may. Yes. Are you aware of the new workplace relations advisor in Mr. Shorten's office?
No, I'm not.
Are you not? I understand she may have worked for you during the dispute, but it'll be interesting to see. But that's more a comment rather than anything else. I understand Senator Heffernan on behalf of the Coalition had two more questions.
Well, that's just Senator.
Can I comment on that, Senator? I just found out. Yeah, the person in question, I do believe, worked for us for 6 months. She was a temporary appointment from Freehills into Qantas and Secondment to replace somebody that was on maternity leave. So it was a Freehills appointment that helped us with that.
Well, let's hope for some robustness out of Minister Shorten's office.
Awesome chance from these Freehill employees. Senator Heffernan, I've got Senator Zenfron has 15 minutes. So I've got about and 12 o'clock we're going to pull up on the dot, so I'm going to ask you to be brief.
The relationship between the regional, national and international divisions of Qantas, you say that one is dependent on the other. Yep. So that if for the simplification of the purposes, if your international regional had to put up with this, the Act, and belly up, what would that do to your regional domestic?
It's a great question, Senator. We're very much worried about this because we think the whole combination of the Qantas domestic business, or frequent flyer business and international business have a relationship and support each other, that if you have a part of your business that is not viable, that you cannot support, and then it does have a detrimental impact on the other parts of it. We know for the corporate market, as an example, that if you're bidding for BHP work or Rio Tinto work, you have to offer not only a regional, domestic, but international network. It's very important for us to have that. But if the international network is losing over $200 million, it doesn't matter what you're making in domestic or in the regional networks, it's just not sustainable. And the real dilemma we get into is those figures that we talked about in terms of the fleet renewal. Because those numbers are usually related back to a person's own mortgage. If you were in a position where your income was $1,700 a week or a month, but you were spending on rent $2,500, you'd be extremely worried. You know that your income is not supporting your rent. That's where we are today. We're not covering our mortgage. We're in a position where we've got a $1.7 billion cash flow and a $2.5 billion requirement for new aircraft coming in each year. So there's two alternatives. We stop ordering aircraft, which we have the problem that Senator Gallagher was talking about, where the fleet gets aging, and our competitive position against the other carriers gets worse and worse because we don't have the fuel efficiency, we don't have the product. Or we get our profitability up to cover the cost of that fleet. And the profitability improvement is dependent on one division, because that's international. Because you can't make super profits on domestic without inviting in a large range of competitors who say this is a great market to go after. And we've seen Tiger, we've seen Impulse, we've seen Virgin, we've seen Compass 1 and Compass 2 whenever that's happened. So you can't have super profits on one part of your business. It means every part of your business has to perform. And because international isn't performing, it's threatening the renewal of our fleet, the economic performance of the entire group, and that's why there's an imperative for us to turn it around.
So the concept behind the bill of strengthening the conditions of international flight crew on your flights would directly impact on the regional?
It would, Senator, as we pointed out, I mean, the big issue for us is the different parts of the bill have different implications on us. But the different parts of the bill would have an immediate effect, the Qantas Sale Act amendments, would have immediate effect on applying conditions on Jetstar, which we believe forces us into Jetstar having an economic problem or us having to sell Jetstar. And that's the reality of what those conditions apply. Losing Jetstar from the group will lose future profitability because Jetstar is very profitable, and the profits from Jetstar is helping contribute to that $1.7 billion every year, which is our income. And if we lose that, it puts even more burden on Qantas to fund its fleet replacement program, which it won't be able to do. So that does threaten the entire group. The second component in terms of the crew changes does have an impact on Jetstar's operations and it makes Jetstar non-competitive on a whole series of regional operations, which would mean those assets would have to be removed and there would be job losses as a consequence of that, with the assets either returned or redeployed somewhere else, because they will not be making sufficient return for us to justify it.
So in terms of good for the goose, good for the gander, the common practice for commingled crews internationally compared to Qantas, what happens internationally?
A lot of carriers have what we would call tag flights of one kind or another, where they do operate their own crews on different jurisdictions and play their local domicile rates. And one good example is something that we do with Qantas, which we fly Sydney, LA, New York. That's a tag flight between LA and New York. And we do play Australian terms and conditions on that tag flight, even though it is across another jurisdiction. The one difference, because there's no local traffic rights, so we can't pick up local traffic, but it's still, we do carry our own onward traffic, so there's traffic that we let off in LA, and that we can pick up and take on to New York. And a lot of carriers do that. Cathay do that in this country. Where they have what's called their own onward traffic, where they can pick them up and fly them onto a leg. Adelaide, Melbourne is a good example where Cathay do it, and they apply Hong Kong terms and conditions on that route.
But the pay rate, is it in Australian dollars or US dollars, say, on the American LA?
We pay in Australian dollars.
So that really doubles there.
It makes the route even harder. Yeah.
I think it's worth saying that most international airlines have bases around different parts of the world and use a variety of crewing models to get both efficiency and productivity, and also to compete with the other local providers. So a lot of the US carriers have bases in Asia. Obviously Qantas, we talked about the base in the UK. It's quite a common practice to have people located in different parts of the world, which helps you with the logistics of actually running an international airline.
Okay, thank you, Senator.
Only 12 minutes to go, and rather than slow bake, this is more like microwave questions, if you like. Can I just go to the issue of Jet Connect? Qantas pays all the bill for Jet Connect. Can I just clarify that?
No, Qantas doesn't pay all the bills for Jet Connect. So what happens, Jet Connect is a New Zealand wet lease business that operates wet leased aircraft, as we talked about, to Qantas. Qantas pays Jet Connect a fee which is on commercial terms for the wet lease arrangement, and Jet Connect provides aircraft crew maintenance and probably insurance for that rate, and Jet Connect makes a margin out of that provision to Qantas. Qantas then operates those aircraft on commercial routes, like the Trans-Tasman, and then Qantas pays, in addition to those charges to Jet Connect, it pays the fuel, the en route, the airport landing fees, the sales and distribution costs itself, and it keeps all of the revenue associated with the sale of the tickets, and some of that revenue goes to pay Jet Connect.
Senior Deputy President Drake at the Fair Work Australia decision said that Mr Daff, Jet Connect's then Chief Executive Officer, does nothing significant. His ignorance concerning Jet Connect's financial affairs is staggering. In other words, that all the key decisions are being made by Qantas. Would you agree with that characterisation by Senior Deputy President Drake?
No, I wouldn't, because I think we are in a position where some of the significant decisions relating to Jet Connect are made by the local management in terms of the recruitment, in terms of the provision of where the maintenance is done, in terms of the management of the AOC. So Paul Daff at the time, as an example, was the AOC holder. That is a significant responsibility for any airline. Myself and Bruce at different stages have held that. So I would actually not classify his role as insignificant. Having the AOC responsibility is a very significant element of responsibility. Mr. Daff held that.
Deputy President Drake said that finances are in someone else's hands, and that someone is an employee of Qantas. That's correct, though, isn't it?
The financing and the reporting of it, as we talked about, is quite complex, Senator. And there are components of it that are done locally, and there are components of it that are done with a local finance team, and there are components of it that obviously, because it relates to the Trans-Tasman operation, that are done with our finance team. So again, there is a local component and there is a component that's done for the group.
I think, Senator, it probably goes to a confusion about what a wet lease provider does, but JetConnect is a standalone business with its own AOC.
Sure.
The confusion is, and when you get into issues where you're talking about commercial aspects or where the aircraft fly, which obviously the person that's contracting the wet lease provider will decide. So there's a lot of responsibility that falls on different organisations, and not understanding how a wet lease provider works, I think, creates that confusion about what should that person know about.
And I think, Senator, in fairness to Paul, we did talk to Paul afterwards, and Paul knew a lot of the answers to the questions, but sometimes people, when they're up in front of groups like you, have stage fright. Now, I've had stage fright a few times here.
Stage fright.
Where you can actually freeze up and not say the answers to the questions.
Where's Mr. Daff now?
Mr. Daff is working with Jetstar Asia.
And in what capacity?
As acting CEO of Jetstar Asia.
Okay, so you don't expect any other finding in terms of, you're saying that his ignorance, the finding of his ignorance concerning JetConnect's financial affairs as being staggering, that was, you put that down to stage fright?
I have to say, Paul Daff, I don't get into individuals, Senator, because I don't think it's appropriate. Sure. But I will say that Paul Daff is an unbelievably capable individual in our organisation.
I won't follow that any further.
And he has gotten this role in Jetstar Asia because I think highly of him. Bruce thinks highly of him in the management team. And people can have issues where the performance, they make mistakes on it. That was not the Paul Daff we knew. Unfortunately, I think those comments are unfortunate. It's not the Paul Daff I know, and Paul Daff is a very capable, very well manager, and he's managed JetConnect.
I'm only referring to the judgment or part of the judgment. Mr. Buchanan, on the 18th of July 2011, the Sydney Morning Herald reported you were saying that, and again, I was staggered by the figure, so if it's wrong, please correct the record. It says, and I'll quote from the article, he said that the company is aiming to maintain a 20% share of the Asia-Pacific low-cost carrier market and might need to have as much as 400 aircraft by 2020. Is that right?
I think that's straight mathematics. So what we said was that to maintain a 20% market share, you'd need 400 aircraft if the growth in China and Japan would continue at the current rates. So that's just straight mathematics. We estimate that there'll be around 2,000 aircraft required in Asia Pacific to satisfy the low-cost carrier demand. And what we're seeing now is North Asia, which is China, Korea and Japan, which previously been closed to low-cost carriers and are opening up. We're going to see large growth in those markets.
Well, if that grows, so that's not inaccurate then, that quote?
That's not inaccurate.
No. So that means in terms of the Qantas Sale Act and the whole issue of subsidiaries, I think Mr. Johnson referred to it on the last occasion, there's nothing in the Qantas Sale Act that would prevent international routes being flown by Jetstar, for instance, and Qantas being largely a domestic carrier.
But
there's no prohibition in the Act for that, is there?
But there's no. I think there's no prohibition in the Act for all of our international routes being replaced by Emirates or Etihad or United one day. You know, the market will dictate who actually flies internationally and which will survive. I tell you our intention, Senator. Our intention. You know, I hope someday that Jetstar can be very big and have great size like that, because that's great for Australia. That's great for the group, because these aircraft will be flying all over Asia. We want Qantas to be in the same position. I want to turn around the Qantas international business so Qantas can have the same growth opportunities the Jetstar have. So the intention, and the only way you can succeed, you can't, I absolutely believe, lock this into legislation to say that you're going to put restrictions on Qantas that somehow would ensure that Qantas stays as it is, because it won't happen. If you put those restrictions in place, Senator, all you'll be ensuring is the absolute demise of Qantas. It has to be commercial, it has to be flexible, and it has to adapt. That's the only way you can ensure what you're saying never happens. And it's not our intention, and we absolutely want this great brand to be flying to every continent around the world, but we have to have a commercial entity.
Can I put it to you these terms? Your predecessor, Jeff Dixon, said back in 2005 to Alan Kohler that he said that, Jetstar compared to Qantas about 20% of the size.
Yeah.
Clearly that's not the case now, and it's not a criticism. But are you able to say with some certainty in 5 years' time or 10 years' time how big the Qantas livery will be, the red flying kangaroo will be compared to, say, Jetstar or other subsidiaries?
But I have to say, Senator, I completely disagree with the premise of your question, because there's, the premise of your question, I have to say, is there's something wrong with Jetstar being bigger than we expected.
I'm just suggesting, Jeff Dixon made a prediction back in 2005. What do you see the future of Qantas itself, the brand, compared to, say, Jetstar or other subsidiaries?
And can I say, with Jeff Dixon's prediction, which I did say, he was only talking about at the time, because I know exactly what the 23 refers to. It refers to the first set of aircraft that Jetstar
20% was in an interview in 2005.
67 cents the US dollar.
And I mean, Jeff Dixon would have been, Jeff Dixon in his mind, when he was CEO of the Qantas Group, would have thought Jetstar had this huge potential, and that if we could deliver on it would be great, and he'd be overjoyed at the success that Jetstars have today, because I think that's great for the Qantas Group. So I'm hopeful, to answer your question directly, Senator, that the proportions remain the same, and both carriers are growing by double digit in terms of the ASKs over the next decade, because then we have succeeded. And it could be the possibility that Jetstar continues to outpace Qantas in growth, but our aim, and what we're trying to do with the business, is get Qantas in a position where it can grow again, because where it is today, nobody in their right minds would put any more capital into Qantas International, and that's what all of the analysts, all of the shareholders would be saying. We have to turn it around, and we have this plan to turn it around so we can put more capital and grow the international business.
And you're confident you turn it around in the next 3 years?
We said our target is to get to a break-even in 3 years, and to get to the return on the cost of capital in 5. That's what we're aiming for.
The Jetstar Asia's taken 8 years, and it's sort of basically just breaking even now, isn't it?
There's a very big difference between a start-up and an established carrier. Qantas International has been operating since 1935. And a start-up carrier, as you know, anybody involved in the start-up business knows that you need to give it some time to get there.
I think it's worth reflecting once again and bringing back a few facts around the Jetstar businesses in Asia, which feeds into that statistic. For equity investment of less than $200 million, the Qantas Group has bought itself a 20% market share in the low-cost carrier market all throughout Asia. What's that doing for Australia? It's giving us a scale to be able to continue to grow and build regional aviation places like Darwin and Cairns that can be viable. It's given us the IP and revenue flows that are coming back for the franchise fees by exporting the knowledge and IP into these markets in Asia. And what are we placed? We've got an opportunity now to continue to participate in the North Asian freeing up of the market, which puts Qantas at a massive opportunity. And we've done it with very, very little capital. We've created a huge option for the Qantas shareholders, and we've done it through Australian workers that have actually built this really strong brand, have built the knowledge and the IP, and have done a tremendous job taking us to where we are.
I hear you, Mr. Buchanan. My final question in the remaining minute and a half is APA, the pilots union, makes in their supplementary submission raises potential immigration issues in terms of foreign crew being used on domestic flights. Have you had any communications with the Department of Immigration and Citizenship, for instance, on this issue? Is that something that's being looked at in addition to the restructuring of rosters? And I think you've said that you were going to provide the roster to the committee, but that still hasn't arrived yet. So that can be the final set of questions.
Yep, I think there hasn't been any discussion with the Department of Immigration I'm aware of on the visa issue. We have had discussions with federal ombudsman on that particular issue, on the visa issues with cabin crew. The visas they operate in Australia effectively allow them to stay here for 30 days when they're operating as international crew in and out of Australia.
So you're confident in complying with Australian immigration laws?
We think so, yep.
You think so? You've assessed it, though?
We're confident that we're complying with Australian immigration laws.
Right. And you've obviously got advice on that about your compliance?
We're confident and our advice is confident.
Okay. And the roster, is that something you'll be able to provide?
It's something we can give you. I guess the issue is we need to be conscious that we're not disclosing information, so understanding exactly what, personal information, so understanding what you want. If you're after summary statistics, which I've tried to provide in terms of the average hours.
I think that was the idea of it, rather than any, of course, not any personal information.
So for instance, I can give you a summary now. The Melbourne International crew do average shift lengths of 10.4 hours. The average Bangkok crew is 10.6 hours. They're almost identical in terms of hours worked. They work slightly less than 3 days a week.
But the conditions on fatigue are a little bit different, aren't they, for international crew?
No, the management of fatigue is identical across the two. There is no difference.
They can be rostered on further hours, though?
They're not rostered on any of the rostering rules are exactly identical for both. So I think we've got to separate the employment rules from an individual entity which may provide, which will become a practice in another one of providing employees to lots of different carriers in the various markets compared to the rostering rules which are identical whether you're employed in Australia or you're employed in Thailand or you're employed in New Zealand or you're employed in Singapore. They're no different. And our crew work very hard and working shift work and working multiple time zones is tough, but they're working around 10.5-hour shifts, so it is longer shifts. But the quid pro quo for that is that they work slightly less than 3 days a week. So there are ample opportunities for rest. And that's the quid pro quo of working as a cabin crew. There's also 6 weeks annual leave. There's a variety of other conditions.
It's been fixed now with the new rosters, basically, hasn't it? With the new roster arrangements, you've actually sorted out those anomalies.
There's been no changes to the rostering practice in terms of fatigue or duty limits. But the only thing that we've changed, a very slight thing that affects a very tiny percentage of our rostering, which is we're now doing concentrated tag flying. It doesn't change the actual hours of work or the types of flying patterns that they're doing. It just changed the number of times they go in and out of Australia.
Would you like to also apply?
So, Senator Kennett, before we have to go, can I correct one thing? I just made a mistake on the date. I think Senator Betts asked me about the engineer expiry date, and I think I said the 31st of December 2015. Well, maths didn't quite work there. It's 31st of December 2014 because it's a 3-year agreement, so I'd just like to correct that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's it, Senator Zenfond. Gentlemen, on behalf of the committee, Mr. Joyce, to you and your team, thank you very much for turning up today.
Thanks, sir.
Just one thing before I do say the final farewells, that there may be some misconception, but I haven't met a member of Parliament, a union member, a union leader or a Qantas employee who is anti-Qantas. We are all fully supportive of Qantas. Yeah. There is nothing better than getting on the red-tailed aeroplane to head back to Australia. We may differentiate on some of your employment issues. So that's how you fix up the outstanding problems with some of your workforce. Wish you all the best. On behalf of the committee, that concludes today's hearing. The committee now stands adjourned.
Thanks, Senator. Thanks, Senators. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll get a bolt, mate.